exchange. Welcome to our webinar about how to get academic credit for your community engaged science work. I'm joined today by editors-in-chief Julia K. Parrish and Kathryn Semmens, and we're going to talk a little bit about the ways that you can get that credit if you're already doing community engaged science or hope to do it in the future. Can you go to the next slide, Julia? So why community science? Let's go to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by community science. This is a very broad term, but generally we mean when scientists and communities do science together to advance one or more community priorities. And it encourages communities, particularly historically marginalized and oppressed communities, to guide, participate in, learn from, and benefit from science. So it's a very broad spectrum of different ways you can engage communities with lots of different ways to do that and options. But we really want to emphasize the part about equity, making sure that those communities are not just being used like for labor in the project, but that they have a say and engagement and they're benefiting from it in some way. And we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the benefits that we see from community science. We see that communities get support that they need, that they get to answer questions that they have. They develop tools and communications to support their communities and make good decisions. They might be translating science that is known, but not accessible to them in some way. It also helps build relationships. It can create really long-lasting relationships across very diverse sets of groups. So that's something that can be an investment and something that can really build trust and like long-term ways that you can work together. There's professional development and growth for everyone involved. You get soft skills like deep listening, co-production, teamwork, things that even if you learn it in the classroom, it's a whole different beast to actually put it into practice and work with people to do something together. Communities, as well as scientists, also gain a lot of technical skills. People learn really how science happens, not just in the theoretical, but the practical on the ground. They learn about different things like project development, how to do different protocols. We also think it's a really important piece of ethics. We talked about this just a second ago, but it rejects that parachute science idea where you're dropping into a community, studying them or studying something important to them or their environment, and then leaving. And it makes sure that the expertise, labor, engagement, their interests, their cares, concerns are something that is valid and recognized and then brought into that conversation and the development and doing of the project. And then there's that bidirectional learning and inspiration that everyone is seen as having their own kind of expertise within relevant, important information to share. And it encourages all those things we always talk about in science, like trust in science and science identity and inspiring that next generation, helping people use science for decision making. We know from lots of research that this kind of work really helps with all of those different metrics. But something I haven't talked about and something that might feel missing, and most of you are probably here because you've already bought into at least some of this, is that professional recognition and academic credit. How do you make this work within the reality of being in a publisher parish kind of dynamic where you may need to have those kinds of work that you're doing be something that if you're justifying it to your boss, to your dean, to your chair, that this is something that is actually also supportive of your academic pathway. And similarly, if you are a community member, like how do you weave that together into something that is building on your resume? So I'm going to start by having a poll. Really curious, what role do you play in community science now? And we'll give people just a minute to answer this. And if you currently don't play any role in community science, you're just curious about it, that's okay too. You're welcome to put I am something else or just put what your current identity is. All right. So it looks like we have people who, most of you are students, grad students or a postdoc, but we also have someone who works in a nonprofit that works with communities. So welcome. Whatever your experience, whatever your role is, you are welcomed here, and we hope you'll get something out of it. I am going to go ahead and turn it over now to my colleagues who are going to talk a little bit about how to answer that question. How do you get that academic and professional credit? So I'm going to turn it first to Julia, and she's going to talk about Community Science Exchange and Community Science Journal.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everybody. My name is Julia Parrish, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Community Science Exchange, which quite interestingly is two different publication venues, a sort of standard peer-reviewed scholarly journal, Community Science, and the Community Science Exchange Hub, which my colleague and the deputy editor, Kathryn Semmens, will talk about in a bit. Next slide. So the Community Science Exchange was founded in 2021, so just a few years ago, on the shoulders of COVIDity. And really it was focusing on promoting equitable public engagement in science, very much along the lines that Liz has just been talking about. Within the exchange, as I said, we have one peer-reviewed journal, Community Science, and that's hosted by AGU, and it's a partnership among many different scholarly organizations. You can see all of their logos to the right. But I also want to mention here that we have a partner journal hosted by AAPS, the Association for Advancing Participatory Sciences, which is citizen science theory and practice. And these two journals occupy coincident or side-by-side spaces, but between the two of us, we fill out all of the space of the practice of doing it, the findings of doing it, and theory behind how equitable public engagement works. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, Community Science, the journal, is focused on equitable public engagement in science. And here we define science very, very broadly. So all of natural science and social science and health science. So you can tell right away that we're not a disciplinary journal. That is, we don't just look at one slice of scholarly work. We look at all possible scholarly work where there is equitable engagement of the public. Okay, and that takes us basically, backwards, please. Thank you. And that takes us from citizen science, which we define as many, many, many different publics engaged in a single project, and they may spread out over space across a state, across a region, across a continent, across the world, to very, very focused place-based community-owned science, really emanating from that set of people living in that place and experiencing issues or concerns. So there are a few requirements to publish in the journal. First of all, of course, all submissions are written in the style of a peer-reviewed scholarly journal article. And just a prequel, if you are thinking, wow, that's just not me, I don't have the time to do that, please, please, please pay attention to what Kate has to say about the hub. Second, within community science, we're really looking for two things. We're looking for the science findings. So what are the outcomes of all of that amazing work that you are doing in, with, and for communities? Not so much how you're doing it, but what are you finding? So science findings on the one hand, and then community voice on the other. And this is really explicit inclusion of community as authors, in positionality statements, in special sections within the article, community description, community impacts, and in quotes or other data or information presentation. And really touching base here a little on with full IRB or Human Subjects Review Board approval. We're also an open access journal, so everybody has access to us, and we address both the FAIR and the CARE data policy frameworks. Next slide. So why publish here? Why publish with us? Again, we're not a disciplinary journal, so you may not get credit as much in academia within your discipline if you're publishing with us. But I would say community science offers something that really no other journal does. And that is the ability to honestly include, elevate, and celebrate the publics that you're working with, whether they are hundreds or hundreds of thousands of them spread broadly, or it's one community that you have worked with for a long time. So our requirement of including community voice is actually an opportunity for you to say loudly and proudly that you do your science with community. And we really strongly believe that that ability to include community voice as well as your science findings makes us unique. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate Semmens. I'm the deputy editor and I manage the Exchange Hub, which also makes us unique. So building off of Julia's Why Should You Consider Us? And if you can go to the next slide. So the Hub is a place where you can submit your materials that might not be ready for a journal article, or maybe there are additional materials if you did do a journal article and you have extra supplementary materials that you want to share with the community. This is the place to do that. And so it's not as rigorously peer-reviewed as the journal article, but it still goes through a review with our editors. So it is vetted, but it allows for a more diversity of the types of things that can be submitted and shared, and maybe makes it more accessible to some of your projects or communities. So this is, the Hub itself has places for case studies or project reports. There's also educational resources, tools, there's complementary materials that go along with things that have been submitted to the journal. It's free to publish. And like I said, it's not peer-reviewed, but it is editor vetted. And again, we still want to really highlight that community involvement and relationship. So that is something that we will particularly look for when you do submit to the Hub. So making sure that that community voice is explained or included, and making sure that that's a central piece. Recently, we were able to get the ability to have this material have a DOI, which also helps with getting credit for the materials and also making it a stable resource that's not going to go away. So next slide. We have 4 main content categories for the Hub. As I mentioned, there's case studies or project reports, and a lot of our submissions do align here. So these are project descriptions that can be a lot of times we might get someone coming to the journal that has a very specific hyper-local scenario, and they would probably be a better fit for this in the Hub. Just because of that hyper-local focus. And you'll see that in the case studies that are on the Hub already. There's also protocols and methods which help move our field forward. So sharing those things that you've developed about working with communities, guidebooks, example agreements with the community, all of that is really helpful. There's tools and resources. So if there's an app that is developed or a visualization tool that has been developed, we can share those as well. We just need to make sure that the URL is stable and that the app is supported going forward. And then educational materials. So this could be actual curricula or workshops that were delivered and the materials that go along with them. So really just trying to bolster our community and move us forward with all of these resources. If you have other types of work, you can always reach out to us. We've had artwork submitted as part of the Hub, and we're open to other media as well, given our technical capabilities. So please reach out if you have any questions. The general guidelines, similar to the journal, it really needs to be focused on how it's benefiting the communities or including and involving communities. There should be a brief description of the authors and stakeholders. You want to write for a public audience so that the general public can understand. Describe where it's been created in relation to the community and how it could be used or has been used in local communities. It needs to not be copyrighted, and it should be publicly available, free to access. And you can include visuals, you can include graphics. It doesn't have to be just a report. It could be an infographic. It could be something that's more accessible. We would love to have anything that you think might be helpful. And then it's a fairly simple submission process. If you go to the next slide, you can go to our communityscience.org website and /hub or /contribute, and you can get to the submission form, which just asks what type of resource you have, your author names, a description, the community involvement, and then you can upload your files, and we would be in touch with you. So it's something to consider in addition to submitting to the journal, or instead of submitting to the journal if your work might not be the fit for a journal, a robust journal submission. Definitely please consider the hub. I will also talk a little bit about promoting community science. This is, well, Julia said the other day, we're not new anymore, but I still feel like we're relatively new compared to the other AGU journals. We're really trying to promote community science, both the journal and the hub, as well as community science itself. We're really fervent believers in the power of this work. So what we've been trying to do is promote the submissions that come in through EOS, which is a publication of AGU that goes out to a broader audience, a more general audience, and so has a larger viewership. So we will do editor's highlights of submissions, of journal articles, really trying to highlight, it's a short, very brief highlight that links to the original publication, but it gets more eyes on it and it gets it more out to the general AGU and viewership audience. So we have that. We also share on social media. I think you can go to the next slide, maybe. Yeah. We are on Blue Sky, we are on Facebook, and we try to put out as much as we can to share about this great work. So if you publish with us, you will have the academic DOI, but you will also have us really cheerleading for you and trying to share the work broadly.
Thank you both so much. I'm going to talk really briefly about AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange. This is our community science program here at AGU, and let's go to the next slide. We have been around since 2013. Our goal is we actually help put together and run projects that are community science projects. So we have launched over, actually, I think it's now 380 projects in 15 countries, trained more than 1,500 people. We support more than 20 projects now that are Spanish speaking. So we try to do a lot of this work and put it into practice. And from that, we get sort of perspectives because we have project participants who are scientists, project participants who are community members, and we have people that we train up as our fellows who are usually very familiar with the sciences, but they're getting trained in those soft skills like project development, project management, how to do active listening and all of that to actually be the glue that pulls everyone together and make sure things move forward. So the next slide. Well, our projects range from a lot of different things. They might be like testing, air, soil, and water quality, mapping new or existing data with GIS. So there might be like an interactive map where communities can type in their address and see their relative flood risks. They might be communicating research and data to communities. A lot of times data already exists, but that doesn't mean just because it's open access doesn't mean it's accessible. And that's one of the great things about the exchange is that you can include both the peer-reviewed publication, which might have jargon and might have a lot of statistics and things that might be hard for someone without a degree in that field to understand. But you can also couple that with any kind of broader science communication initiatives that you had. Those resources could also go on the exchange. And then developing the different kinds of mitigation strategies. Those are just some examples of the kinds of projects we have. And you can see the big emphasis is making sure that we are making an impact in the community, that at least some of the outputs aren't just helping the scientists' careers, but also are helping the community advance one or more of their priorities. So let's go to the next slide. And the question might be, how does publishing help with that, right? Because a paper by itself is not an impact. And we know this anyway, because as academics, we know that you need that impact factor. People have to build on it, people have to use it, right? But how do communities use it? How do non-scientists use it? Well, like I said, you can, of course, create really good SciComm and materials to help translate that so that it's actionable and understandable, something that people can use. But it's also worth pointing out that science is a system of power. In that society in which we live, graph, statistics, peer review, they lend credibility to sort of ground up observations and community based claims. So, if done effectively with communities, when you are publishing, you can also be thinking about how it can be useful to them, and that can include being able to have that peer reviewed data that you can then take to policymakers. I have been with community leaders actually on the Hill through AGU's Day on the Hill events. And I have witnessed, senators saying, okay, but do you have data? Like, do you have peer reviewed data to back up what you're claiming? And the community was in process of gathering that data with one of our projects. So the next time that they would talk to that senator, they were able to say, yeah, actually, we do. We have that. It also lets you engage journalists. It gets interest from nonprofits that have different services and opportunities to provide, as well as sometimes entrepreneurs. It can motivate that change in decision making, again, if it's coupled with good comms. It can tap into broader scientific conversations, build on existing data and research, and so much more. But it can be a tool that can be used to make a significant impact in the community. And we go to the next slide, I'm going to give you just a quick example of what that can look like. So in Pinal Creek, California, we had a project that community members who worked on an area in Pinal Creek, which is a watershed flowing into a bay. And there's a lot of illegal dumping and a lot of trash. And they really wanted to figure out where was the trash coming from, what was the trash primarily, and what could be done about it. So they mapped the area, and then community members were trained in particular protocols for collecting, weighing, categorizing, and identifying that trash. The randomized sampling process. In the output, they found that in just the fall, there was over 9,200 gallons of litter, just a lot of litter, and most of it was single-use plastics and cigarettes. So they published in Community Science Journal. They also put together some different kinds of communications. They did lots of local engagement and community forums, and they went and talked to policymakers, including the city council. And the end impact of that was that not only did they create a Pinal Creek's Allies, which is supported not just through local community member activism, but also some local businesses. But on September 17, 2024, the city formally adopted an ordinance to reduce single-use plastic as a direct result of the results that were presented to the city council in 2022 that came out of that peer-reviewed publication, that came out of that data and that report that they were able to then present to the city council. And you can see on the left, you can scan that QR code if you want to read their whole paper in the journal, but this is just a selection from that article where they talk about that those goals of wanting to improve the environmental stewardship and make it as clean as possible. The way they were successful is using a scientifically established methodology to collect data to inform the creation of new policies and to engage that broader community. And being able to think about that publication, what would be needed for it, the processes that would be required to have like high quality data for publication helped frame the way they went about this project, which then meant that the data that they had was something that really had a lot of weight to it when they went to the city council and others to advocate for change. And and so now we come to the Q&A section. I hope that we have convinced you that if you're interested in doing community engaged science, there's lots of ways to get involved and ways to get that academic credit. We have both editors here with us today, and I'm here as well, happy to answer any questions. So if you have any questions, there is a Q&A function. We are on Zoom, so at the bottom somewhere, there should be what looks like a little text box, and it has like a question mark in the middle of it. That should be your Q&A, and if you click that, it'll pop up, and you'll be able to ask questions. And I also have a couple, while we wait for people to put their questions in the chat, I actually have a couple of questions that were sent in earlier, and I'll read them out. So one question is actually for the editors. So you have both worked in community science for a while now. Can you share sort of what kinds of community science you do, like a project you're particularly proud of that you've seen as successful, whether it's yours or someone else's, just to give us some examples of what community science can look like. And Julia, why don't we start with you and then Kate?
Well, I actually think the example that you gave about the Pinole Creek watershed was a really excellent one, and that to me is a great example of place-based, community-based work, right? Where there's a group of people who live in a place, they know it, they observe it more completely than anybody from outside, and they were really the genesis of the work. And I just love that kind of um, community science work. I myself have been involved in that kind of work within fisheries in Washington State and in Alaska, where we are the scientists who are helping the fishers um, trial gear changes that will have a positive impact on species that are bycaught in a fishery. So we're not telling them what to do. What we're actually doing is providing them with an experimental framework and a statistical framework that can make their results stand up in the court of science. And so I think that's another sort of general example of how this work can really advance not only science, basic understanding, in my case, how seabirds interact with fishery gear, but also can very much advance impacts all the way to policy change. In the case of fisheries, local to national, how they're regulated. And so to me, community science can be a win-win-win situation, a win for the community, a win for the scientists involved, right? Because they're actually discovering new things or testing out solutions, and a win for policy. It just makes things better, I would say. But also to stretch to the other side, really situations in which scientists really must reach out to publics quite broadly to help them in doing the science they do. So the science that I do is at scale, the entire North Pacific Ocean. My graduate students and postdocs cannot possibly work at that scale. We need the eyes and ears of not hundreds, but thousands of people who know their individual spaces far more than I ever will. And we lean on them quite heavily to collect observations, which we then put into a very large scale, a map, basically, of what's going on in space-time. And what we give back to communities is that large scale understanding or science story of what's going on. So the interaction between science and community is a little bit different there, but is equally equitable. We can't do our science without community, and community can understand how they're situated within broad patterns that they might not otherwise be able to see. So those are two really great kind of edge examples, and both of those and everything in between goes into community science. Kate, why don't you talk a little bit? You come from a different point of view.
Yeah, so I am the science director of a nonprofit, and we do science education, but also a lot of work with the community. And our approach is to integrate science, art, and community in all of our programming. So we do a lot with sustainability and climate action, really trying to move our community forward on those things. And one of the projects that I think really illustrates this is called Create Resilience. And I did get this published in Community Science, but I'm putting the direct link to the thing I'm going to talk about in the chat. We worked with local artists and we had a lot of community meetings, really just trying to get the community together to discuss what resiliency means in the face of hazards and how they're being affected by climate change. We have a long history of flooding in our local community, so we wanted to get that on everyone's radar and just have this discussion about looking forward. How do we be better prepared? What do we need to do about that? And instead of coming in top down and saying, here's a plan, we got to implement it, we wanted it to be bottom up and engage the community. So we had a lot of forums and discussions and activities with the community, and then we had these local artists do these large 15-foot murals about what that vision for community resilience looks like. And we had 3 smaller communities we worked with. They're very distinct. One was rural, one was more urban. You can really see the differences there. But that was really powerful because not everybody will read a journal article or, will read in general, which is sad to say. But if they can see this visualization of it, it resonates more with them or draws them in, so then they want to know more. And that was our intent. And these murals were placed within the community, and we move them periodically, and we'll have conversations around them. And it is a really good way to not only involve the community, but also keep that engagement and interaction going.
Thank you. I love both of those answers. Like you said, Julia, they're very different. But I think it really highlights that spectrum of community engaged science that we're talking about here, and that there are lots of different entry points and lots of different kinds of outputs that can still have big impacts, and that we are happy to accept all and everything in between. Um, in fact, the other question that I see is, do you have any advice for getting involved in community science? Like if you are coming from a more traditional science space, what would you suggest as a way for people to start getting into this space, and to do that ethically? And maybe we'll start with Kate this time and then go to Julia.
So it depends on whether you're already integrated into that community or if you're coming in as kind of an outsider. I think the critical piece in community science work is to have that relationship with the community. If you, either that's established by being in the community yourself or having partners that are integrated and trusted in the community. I also do a lot of work with flooding, and we do focus groups across the country. And to come into these communities and ask them, what they need and how they're understanding forecasts and all that sort of stuff, it doesn't work unless you have someone in the community that's a partner that's trusted. And so that, to me, is a critical piece. So if you are wanting to get into this space, it's building up those relationships first, I think, and really trying to authentically get to know the community and understand what their needs are instead of coming in with a presupposed view of what they need. Asking them is the critical piece, and then saying, I have this skill set. Is there something I can do to help with any challenges that you're dealing with? That's the way to get started. And I will caution that this work is not speedy. A lot of times, I mean, you might get an occasional project here or there that is, but for the most part, it takes time to build those relationships and trust and to do this work well. And so that's another thing that we like to make sure that people understand. It doesn't mean that the work is not going on and it's not being effective. It just means that we're doing it carefully and in a way that's respectful.
Yeah, definitely. Echoing what Kate said, both about respect and co-creation and co-production, and the time it takes to do that. On the other hand, I would say to do good scholarly work, it takes time. This is time spent in a different way, but I really want to push back a little bit against the, oh my gosh, community science takes so much time and you can do other kinds of science and just pop out those journal articles like, I don't know, popcorn. In most science that we do, especially in environmental science, broadly defined, it takes time to do the work. So this is just a dedication to time spent developing relationships, not unlike you spend developing the collegial relationships that you will have in science through your lifetime. It's just with other people. And I would say that broadens and strengthens science. So I'm putting in the chat right now a link to the Aspire, capital ASPIRE program. It's funded by the National Science Foundation. And it is a program which It creates awareness about community science. There is a virtual discussion series, the VDS, because we, of course, abbreviate everything, that will be starting up soon. Its second year. It also funds a application-based immersive institute. That's a week in a particular community with the rest of the cohort, really learning much, much more about what work in community is like. So a chance to really dip your toe into the community science waters. And then all the way to also application-based small grants up to $40,000 to do community-based work, where 30,000 of that goes to the work of the science and co-production of the science, and 10,000 of that goes directly to community to help with stipends and other kinds of supports within community to make sure that the work is equitably accomplished. So for anybody who's really thinking about community science and thinking, how can I use this as another, it's an and, not an or, as another approach to my science, I really, really strongly advise you to check out Aspire.
Thank you. And I'm going to give a small shameless plug for Thriving Earth Exchange, that we also have opportunities for people to volunteer for any of these roles. If community members, you have something that you think science could help you address, especially if it's in the sort of AGU realm, we are happy to start a project. But also, if you're a scientist that might be a good fit, we have ways for you to sign up. And if you want to learn those sort of soft skills and work with communities and projects, we also have fellowship roles for you as well. So there are lots of ways to tap into this. I think that actually brings me to another question that I see, which is also about, like, if you are not a scientist, but you want to get engaged in this kind of work, like let's say you're on the community side of things, you're at a nonprofit. We have someone here who's from a nonprofit group. What kind of suggestions or advice do you have for them to get involved, and also, how this kind of resource could be useful to them? You can start with Julia.
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly in my career, I have worked with all sorts of people coming from local community organizations, coming from regional to national to actually even international nonprofits. And normally we all tend to come together around a particular issue or concern, often that emanates locally, but it can also be at a broader scale. So sitting in a nonprofit or community organization, and I'm actually really interested to hear what Kate has to say about this, because she has the experience that I don't have of actually being there and doing it. What I would say is, if you are interested in exploring whether there are partners for you within academic science or potentially government agency, state government, tribal government, federal government, look around for a pet scientist. I'm a pet scientist all the time, right? So I come in and just have conversations with people because they invite me. So I'm not telling people what to do. I'm responding to questions and concerns that people have. And there are lots of folks like me in academic science, and in today's webbiness, you can find them fairly easily. So check out your local community college or university, and with just a little bit of Googling, you'll be able to find those people.
I think probably Liz will plug Thriving Earth Exchange, but that's a great program for a community or a nonprofit to reach out to. They're tremendous connectors, both getting, a project manager to help with your specific project. The process itself is really helpful, going through a scoping process to really zero in on your priorities and understand the challenges that you have, and then connecting you with a scientist, because they have so many connections. And I mean, AGU itself has 200,000 Earth and space scientists, and so being able to reach that group is really helpful. That said, I think there's usually universities that are within, a driving distance of any community. It could be a community college or even a larger university. Having someone that's closer to the community physically, or it understands the community and the culture, is a lot of times really helpful. And they're there, and they might have resources that are right there to help you and your community. So I think that, just like Julia said, looking around to see what assets are already in your community is a great first step. And then just reaching out and saying, hey, I just want to get to know you and your work, and this is what we're dealing with, and we're looking for support or resources that could help us in our efforts. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would say, no, I don't want to talk to you, because a lot of scientists love to talk about themselves and their research and to be helpful. So I think the bigger stumbling is the funding, but that's slowly improving from what I've seen since this work has been starting. So yeah, reach out. There's lots of resources there.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously, I don't need to pitch Throwing Earth yet again, but I'll just echo the thing that you both said. I've also been the pet scientist. That when I was a grad student, I had some nonprofits and groups reach out to me, asking if they could just like buy me a lunch, buy me a coffee, and pick my brain. And I was always happy to do it, especially as a grad student. I mean, anyone who offers you free lunch, you take them up on it. But it was also something I was passionate about, and I was happy to help them think through. And academic partners can be valuable because sometimes they have access to potential funding opportunities that you don't. And they, as part of that university system, do have people who can manage the money, who can write the checks, who can manage. So if it's a large grant like an NSF, sometimes those aren't well set up for small groups, but the academic group might be able to help you manage it. And of course, you can also now tell them that you know where they could publish their work and get some of that academic credit. So I have another question that came in that is looking more at the technical piece, that they have some results from a project they've worked on. They'd like to write it up, and they're trying to decide, should they do the journal or should they do the exchange? How do they make that decision? And are there any resources available to them to help them?
Wow, that's a great question. Very practical kind of question. We get inquiries to the journal and hub about once a week. And folks are basically asking that question. And they're saying, this is the work that I've done, and we have a draft, or we've written an abstract, and here it is. And could you give us some advice? So that's actually a really lovely way to do things. I wouldn't go all the way to like, I have this whole manuscript written, right? Because that's a lot of time invested. But it's an easy way to send an inquiry, communityscience.org, and you can get there, community sci. And so write us, and we'll take a look and give you some advice. But broadly, to address that question, Liz, I would say that the style of a peer-reviewed scholarly journal publication is quite constrained, right? So within community science, we've stretched that quite a lot by not just wanting, but requiring community voice, and allowing a bunch of different ways for that to be included in the article. But nevertheless, these articles have a standard format. They have an introduction, which provides a scholarly context, a lot of references to the literature, the middle meat of the paper, which is how we did the work and what we found, and then a discussion, which really integrates those findings back into the context that you laid out in the introduction. And that kind of format is pretty typical of a scholarly journal, and it takes a bit of time to do that writing. You really have to know the relevant literature. You have to really be able to situate your work well. You have to really think about whether you want to use a particular statistical treatment on the information that you have. And so all of that can take time. And if you are outside of that scholarly space, you may be asking yourself, well, why? Why do that? Why spend all that time? That is not benefiting me, and it's not benefiting my organization. But I still want to get this work out there because it's good, because it can help not only my community, but other communities facing similar things. And that is a situation, that is one of the reasons that the hub was invented, to really be able to forefront and create a DOI, a permanent record, which gives you credit and attribution, and that you can point to and others can get to for your work. So the hub is intentionally much, much broader in the types of material that it accepts. And so I think that folks should just consider what is the currency of my position, of my organization, and how can I best spend my time getting this work out? And if it happens not to be in a scholarly journal context, we celebrate that. That's one of the reasons, that's the main reason that we invented the hub. However, on the other hand, if you are within academic science working in community, or you're a community organization and you've got a pet scientist and you want to actually give them credit for some of this work coming out, having them create a scholarly manuscript to submit to community science might be just a thing. So we really think a lot about who gets credit and what are the currencies of the stream or the path in community science that you're in. And can you have your cake and eat it too, right? Can you create a set of outputs that everybody can get credit for within their own organization?
Echo everything Julia said, but also add, go in the journal and look at the articles that are submitted as examples. You can also go in the hub and look at the examples that are already there that can give you an idea of where your work might fit. Put the email to communitysci@agu.org in the chat. So please reach out if you have questions or want our advice on your specific situation. And also communitysci.org/hub. It has actual descriptions of the different content types that we have, those 4 ones I reviewed, and examples. So you can see, oh, well, my toolkit actually, well, this thing I developed will fit here as a toolkit, or, you know, it'll fit better here. So please look and see that there's lots of examples, and we're building this this exchange every day. So we welcome your input.
Thank you both. I was going to add, just from our project participants, the things that we've heard is that both community members and teachers and professors, as well as people who are actually doing sort of like active projects, one of the things they love about the resources on places like the hub is that it gives them really practical examples that they can build on. They don't have to reinvent the wheel, and it's really laid out quite often in a way that's really actionable. Not that peer-reviewed publications don't have that, but it's kind of sometimes hard to pull that together, right? And those kinds of resources can be really valuable. On the flip side, in addition to giving your scientists credit when they publish, we've also seen community members can build up their own resumes when they are co-authors on these pieces. It really helps them as they are doing broader advocacy, as they're building sort of something in their own community, if they're starting a nonprofit or sort of want to be a change maker, someone that gets listened to. It sometimes is a really great thing to have on their resume, and they will brag about it and get recognized for it for being a published author in academic spaces. So it's also something that you can think about how it can help with the community and not just the scientists. Well, I think that this has been a fantastic webinar. I don't see any other additional questions coming in from the Q&A, though people have a couple of minutes if there's a last minute question. But I just want to give both Kate and Julia a second if there's anything, any last minute thoughts, anything that you would like to leave people with, and then we can close out. And I'll start with Julia.
Thanks, Liz. Well, as Liz just said, really, really great opportunity. Thanks for attending. And for those who will listen later, Thanks for listening. Um, really great opportunity to really just discuss and give folks examples of successful, equitable public engagement in science. In the world that we live in right now, there has never been a better time to do this work. And that is because when people are connected to science, are engaged directly in science, they become the proponents, right? So it is a fantastic way for folks within science already to really get the word out about why science, and particularly, I would say, environmental science, is really crucially important in today's world. And then the flip side of that is there are a lot of people in the world, and they live and work and recreate almost everywhere in the world. They have the observational skills that science as a discipline will never have, right? And so our science is better, will be better by those direct connections. I know that the work that I do about climate change in ocean environments, I can't do that work without the observations of thousands and thousands of people on a monthly basis. So both sides succeed, are stronger, are better when we work together. Sort of like the motto that is right behind Liz, right? When communities lead, science succeeds.
I don't know that I can top that, but I will just echo uh, how important community science is, and it's a lot more than what people think when they just hear community science, and it I feel like it really strengthens the scientific community to consider the context within which the science is being observed, analyzed, and applied. And so that connection to science and society, to me personally, is crucial. And that some of the issues that we're dealing with currently are a result of kind of that breakdown between science and society. So really highlighting the need for that bi-directional relationship that Julia was talking about. And this work is just so important. So we want to share it. We want to share it in an accessible way, and we want to highlight your stories and the great work that you're doing on the ground. So we don't want it to be onerous. We really want to celebrate this good work, and we hope that you consider submitting your resources and your stories to us.
Thank you both. Yeah, I think one of the really wonderful things about community science is it's not just scientists engaging with communities, but we're also building a broader community as we do that. That strong communities include people who are not like you. It includes really diverse sets and groups of people, and it pushes everyone into a better place. And as Julia said, I think there's no better time to be thinking about how we build those connections across different diverse stakeholders and different sectors. So I'm really excited about this. I hope all of you will be interested and get started or continue to invest, that you'll publish, that you'll share, and you'll be part of our broader community. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar, but if you have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us. If I can't answer, as you can see, we're all in conversation. We will ping pong your questions back and forth and make sure that you get the support you need. Thank you all so much.